Right now, in this moment, 95 out of every 100 people watching this video will never accumulate $100,000 in savings. Not because they don't earn enough, not because they weren't born into the right family, and not because the economy is unfair, though it sometimes is. The reason is something far more precise, far more personal, and far more fixable than any of those explanations. This video is about that reason, and more importantly, it is about the specific difference between the 95 and the 5. Let's start with a number that changes everything. $1,000. Not 100,000. 1,000. Because the road to $100,000 does not begin at 10,000 or 50,000. It begins at 1,000, and specifically, it begins at the moment you decide that $1,000 sitting untouched in an account is more valuable to you than $1,000 flowing through your life in the form of experiences, conveniences, and upgrades. Most people never make that decision consciously. They make the opposite decision by default, repeatedly, without realizing it is a decision at all. Here is what the data actually shows. The majority of working adults in developed economies, people with jobs, steady income, and reasonable living standards, carry less than $1,000 in liquid savings at any given time. Not because their income is too low to save, but because every increase in income has been matched, and usually exceeded, by an increase in the complexity and cost of their lifestyle. This is the first mechanism that separates the 95 from the 5. It is called lifestyle inflation, and it operates so gradually and so naturally that most people never identify it as a pattern while it is happening to them. You get a raise. You feel, correctly, that you have earned it, and almost immediately, without a specific decision being made, things begin to adjust. The apartment that was fine becomes slightly less fine now that you can afford something better. The car that worked becomes something worth upgrading now that the monthly payment feels manageable. The restaurants you visit shift slightly upward in price. The brands you choose shift slightly upward in status. Each individual change is justifiable. Together, they consume the entire raise before it has a chance to compound into anything. And here is the critical detail: lifestyle inflation is not a moral failure. It is an extremely rational response to an environment that is specifically engineered to absorb surplus income the moment it appears. Every system you interact with financially, marketing, social platforms, retail design, subscription models, financing options, exists to convert your income increase into consumption as quickly and as pleasurably as possible. The 5% are not more disciplined people. They are people who, at some point, became aware of this system and made a structural decision to partially opt out of it. The structural decision looks like this: before income enters the consumption system, a fixed portion is redirected, not after expenses are paid, not with whatever is left over at the end of the month, because research consistently shows that whatever is left over at the end of the month is approximately zero for most people, regardless of income level. Before the moment income arrives, a portion moves to a separate account with a specific purpose. The remaining amount is what gets to participate in the lifestyle. This single structural change, paying yourself before you pay your lifestyle, is responsible for more wealth accumulation among ordinary income earners than any investment strategy, side hustle, or financial product ever created. But here is where it gets more interesting and more honest. The structural decision alone is not sufficient, because the environment will pressure test it constantly. Social comparison is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology, and financial behavior is one of its primary battlegrounds. The car your neighbor drives, the vacation your colleague posts, the kitchen renovation your sibling completed, these are not neutral observations. They are inputs into a continuous unconscious calculation about where you stand relative to people whose opinions matter to you. The 95% respond to this calculation by adjusting their spending upward to reduce the perceived gap. The 5% respond by adjusting their reference group, gradually. The people they compare themselves to are other people building long-term stability. And the status signals they respond to shift from visible consumption to invisible accumulation. This shift in reference group is rarely discussed in financial advice because it sounds abstract. But it is one of the most concrete behavioral changes that separates the two groups. What feels like status begins to reorganize itself. A growing account balance, a diversified portfolio, an emergency fund that covers 6 months of expenses, these become the signals of success, even though nobody at a dinner party will ever see them. Now let's talk about the threshold structure, the specific milestones that mark progression through the 5% pathway. The first threshold is $1,000. This is the emergency fund baseline, the amount that prevents a single unexpected expense from derailing an entire financial system. Without this buffer, every car repair, medical bill, or broken appliance requires either debt or the liquidation of whatever progress has been made. With it, these events become manageable rather than catastrophic. The second threshold is $10,000. As we discussed in the previous video, this is the psychological boundary where money stops feeling like a current and starts feeling like a system. Below 10,000, saving feels like restriction. At 10,000, saving begins to feel like architecture. This shift in perception is not trivial. It is what makes continued accumulation feel sustainable rather than punishing. The third threshold is $50,000. At this level, the math of compound growth begins to become tangible in annual terms. A 10% return on $50,000 is $5,000, an amount that is now large enough to feel real, to register as progress, and to reinforce the behavior that generated it. The feedback loop becomes powerful enough to partially sustain itself. The fourth threshold is $100,000. This is the number most people cite as their first major financial goal, and there is a reason for that intuition. At this level,